certain individuals engaged in specific actions, and thus Ilhan Omar entered the Senate chamber under the profound belief that she would depart as a martyr, having already weathered tribulations far more severe than this inquiry. She had survived the refugee camps of Kenya, where she spent 4 arduous years, awaiting the opportunity for a new existence. She had endured the relentless attacks on her faith. From the very moment she entered the political arena, she had withstood the death threats that flooded her correspondence daily, as well as the investigations that had ultimately led nowhere because, as she had convinced herself, there was simply nothing to uncover. She had always survived, having constructed an entire career and a pervasive identity built upon the narrative of endurance. The refugee girl who ascended to become a congresswoman, the Muslim woman who shattered barriers, and the voice for those who had none. Today would be no different, she assured herself. Today, she would confront her accusers and emerge stronger than ever. That was the internal narrative she recited as her motorcade arrived at the Capitol. Unaware that Tim Minette had been wearing a recording device for 4 months, unaware that her brother had provided a sworn statement from London offering details only a family member could possess, and unaware that by the end of this day, her entire life would be exposed as a carefully constructed fabrication built on fraud, foreign capital, and contempt for the country that had bestowed everything upon her. Vance possessed knowledge of all these elements and was prepared to disclose them to the world. The vice president sat in the presiding chair, a position that had sparked a week of intense procedural disputes before the hearing even commenced, as Democrats had objected to a vice president presiding over an investigation of a House member, filing motions, demanding recusals, and threatening boycotts. Yet, it had not mattered, for the bipartisan committee had voted to proceed under existing rules by a margin of 73 to 27, ensuring the investigation would move forward. Vance's Marine Corps discipline was evident in every controlled movement and every measured breath. His 4 years in the infantry having taught him how to remain composed when chaos reigned around him, while his Yale law training was manifest in every prepared document and every anticipated objection. However, underneath the polish lay something Omar hadn't expected. Righteousness, the quiet, burning kind that has no need to shout, but rather waits patiently for the precise moment to strike. Before the proceedings could officially begin, Omar leaned into her microphone without waiting for recognition to state for the record that she viewed the proceeding as fundamentally illegitimate, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of 1,000 cable news appearances. She had done this so many times, faced the cameras, projected strength, and controlled the narrative, asserting that the Vice President of the United States had no business presiding over an investigation of a House member, characterizing it as political theater, designed to intimidate a black Muslim woman who dared to question American foreign policy, labeling it Islamophobic persecution dressed up as congressional oversight. She looked directly at the cameras, knowing exactly which networks were broadcasting this live: CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all of them, for this was her stage, and she intended to show what happens when one speaks truth to power in America, illustrating what is done to silence the voices they fear. The gallery stirred as her supporters in the back rows, flown in from Minneapolis for exactly this purpose, nodded along, some holding signs despite the regulations, though security allowed them to remain. Vance waited until she was completely finished, having learned patience in places far more dangerous than Senate chambers, such as Fallujah, where patience had kept him alive. Here, it would serve a different purpose. Noting the Congresswoman's objection for the record, he spoke with a voice that was calm and level, rejecting the objection by stating that the committee was formed by a bipartisan vote and the rules governing his role were approved by the same margin, rendering her objection meritless. He picked up a document from the stack before him, suggesting that before debating procedure, he should read something that might clarify the reason for their presence that day. Omar's attorney, Marcus Webb, leaned forward in his chair, his instincts honed over 30 years of defending politicians in trouble, screaming at him that something was wrong, something they hadn't anticipated. Vance introduced a sworn statement from Ahmed Noor, Saeed Elmi, letting the name hang in the air. Depending on which story the Congresswoman was telling that day, he was either her ex-husband or her brother. The chamber went silent, every reporter's pen freezing above their notebooks, for he could not be both, as that would be biologically impossible and highly illegal. Yet the interesting aspect, according to the statement, was that he was, in fact, both. Omar felt the floor shift beneath her, wondering how they had found Ahmed, who was supposed to be untraceable, living under a different name in the UK, protected by distance, time, and the assumption that no one would look hard enough. Marcus Webb shot to his feet, requesting an immediate recess to review any new evidence not provided through proper discovery channels. But Vance denied the request with a voice that was flat and final, the voice of a man who had made his decision long before this moment and would not be moved. He stated that the Congresswoman had possessed years to answer these questions, having dismissed them as conspiracy theories and called anyone who asked them racist and Islamophobic, hiding behind her identity rather than addressing the substance. Opening the folder in front of him, he declared that today she would address the substance or address it in federal court the following day, asserting that either way, the truth would come out. Vance arranged his documents with the methodical precision of a man who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment, ensuring every page was tabbed, every exhibit numbered, and every argument anticipated. He began by stating he wanted to be careful about how they discussed the first matter, acknowledging that family issues are sensitive, immigration histories can be complex, and cultural differences exist between communities, all of which he understood and respected. Omar forced herself to relax her shoulders to project confidence, adhering to the key principle of never letting them see one sweat. But Vance continued, stating that the evidence he was about to present was not complex at all, but rather very simple and very damning. He held up a photograph of two children, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a modest house in what appeared to be Minnesota. The girl was clearly a young Ilhan Omar, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, and the boy stood beside her with the unmistakable posture of a sibling, sharing the same smile and the same eyes. This photograph, taken in 1995 according to the date stamp, was accompanied by Minneapolis Public School records identifying the two children as Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noor Said Elmi, noting they were enrolled at the same school, had the same address, had the same emergency contacts, and most importantly, as he set the photo down and picked up official documents, had the same parents listed on both enrollment forms. Omar's mind raced as she wondered how he had obtained school records that were supposed to be protected, sealed, and inaccessible without a court order. Vance read the names slowly and clearly. Father Noor Said Elmi, Mother Faduma Abukar Haji Hussein, making sure every syllable was captured by the microphones and recording devices. He pointed out that these names were listed as parents for both Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noor Said Elmi, not as aunt and uncle, not as family friends, and not as guardians, but as parents, the same parents for both children. He looked at her, stating that unless Minneapolis Public Schools made the exact same clerical error on two different enrollment forms for two different children in two different school years, the documents indicated that she and Ahmed Elmi shared the same biological parents, which would make him her brother, not her husband. Omar's attorney leaned over and whispered urgently in her ear, but she waved him off with an irritated gesture having handled worse than this, and stated steadily that the photograph proved absolutely nothing, explaining that Somali families are large and complex. Extended relatives often live together under the same roof. Cousins are raised as siblings, and family friends take on parenting roles, emphasizing that this was a cultural difference. Americans with nuclear family structures often fail to understand. Vance pulled out the school enrollment forms and held them up for the cameras, countering that he was not discussing cultural complexity, but rather a box on a form that says mother and a box that says father, with both boxes containing the same names for both her and Ahmed Elmi. He set the forms down, acknowledging that school records from 30 years ago could theoretically contain errors, and proposed looking at something more recent that could not be explained away. He produced a new document with an FBI letterhead, where classification markings had been redacted, but official stamps were visible, identifying it as a sworn statement taken by FBI agents in London, England, 3 weeks prior, with the witness being Ahmed Nur Syed Elmi himself. The cold feeling in Omar's chest turned to ice. She had known this moment might come and had feared it for years, but she had convinced herself it never would. Vance explained that Elmi had been living in the United Kingdom since 2013, working as an IT consultant under a slightly modified name, keeping a very low profile, avoiding social media, and avoiding the Somali community to essentially hide. Vance looked at her, stating that he remained hidden until their investigators found him, a process that took 18 months of work. He began reading from the statement, in which Elmi identified himself as the biological brother of Ilhan Omar, stating they shared the same father and mother, and grew up in the same household in Somalia before the war, and in the same apartment in Minneapolis after coming to America. Vance paused to let the words sink in before continuing to read Elmi's account. In 2009, his sister proposed they enter into a fraudulent marriage so he could obtain immigration benefits in the United States, assuring him it was common in their community and that many families had done it without being caught, presenting it as the only way for him to legally stay in the country. He agreed, and they obtained a marriage license and legally married in 2009, though they never lived together as husband and wife and never had a romantic relationship, as the marriage was purely for immigration fraud purposes. Vance looked up at Omar, reading the quote where Elmi stated she knew it was illegal, as did he, but they were told by a community elder that the American government rarely investigated such matters in immigrant communities, leading them to believe they would be safe, and that no one would ever find out. He turned to the final page of the statement, reading that Elmi gave the statement voluntarily, without threats or offers, because he was tired of living with the lie, and because his sister had become someone he no longer recognized. He could not stay silent regarding the things she said about America. After everything the country had done for their family, asserting that the hatred she expressed toward the nation that saved their lives was not what their parents taught them, nor what he believed, and he could not let her speak for their family any longer. Vance set the statement down, highlighting that her own brother had given a voluntary statement to federal agents describing in detail a federal crime that both of them committed: immigration fraud, document fraud, and conspiracy. Omar's mind was spinning, thinking that Ahmed had always been the weak one who couldn't handle pressure, concluding that someone must have gotten to him, threatened him, paid him off, or promised him something, for the statement was obviously coerced. She fought to keep her voice level as she argued that her brother had struggled with mental health issues throughout his life and was vulnerable to manipulation, claiming someone clearly pressured him. Vance interrupted, repeating her admission. "So he is your brother." Omar stopped as the words echoed in the chamber, realizing she had admitted it. She tried to backtrack, claiming she misspoke due to the extreme stress of the proceedings and meant to say ex-husband. But Vance pointed out that she had called him her brother on the record, under oath, in a hearing specifically about whether she illegally married her brother. She had walked directly into the trap, feeling the cameras zooming in on her face to capture every flicker of panic. She stated she would like to consult with her attorney before answering further questions, but Vance replied that she could consult all she wanted, yet the next piece of evidence required no input from her at all. He pulled out a laboratory report bearing the letterhead of a nationally recognized forensic testing company detailing a DNA analysis conducted by an independent accredited laboratory using samples obtained legally through discarded items collected from public spaces, where both she and Mr. Elmi had been present. Omar felt the room spinning, wondering when, where, and how they had collected the DNA. Vance stated the results were conclusive. The two individuals tested shared approximately 50% of their DNA, and the probability of a full sibling relationship was 99.7%. Not cousins, not distant relatives, not family friends, but full biological siblings sharing both parents. He set the DNA report down next to the school records and the sworn statement, summarizing the evidence. School records showing the same parents, her brother's sworn confession describing the fraud, DNA evidence proving the sibling relationship with scientific certainty, and her own admission in the chamber. Vance looked at her with something that might have been pity or contempt, stating, "This was not a conspiracy theory, but science, sworn testimony, documentary evidence, and her own admission." He asserted she had committed immigration fraud by entering into a sham marriage with her biological brother to help him obtain benefits he wasn't legally entitled to, a federal crime with a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. Marcus Webb stood up, his face gray, requesting to confer with his client regarding her Fifth Amendment rights, and Vance replied that she could invoke the Fifth Amendment whenever she chose, and he would respect it, but his voice remained calm and almost gentle, as he noted that the evidence had already been entered into the record, and the Department of Justice already possessed copies of everything presented. What she said now only affected whether she looked guilty or whether she looked guilty and evasive. Omar sat frozen, realizing she had been catastrophically wrong to dismiss these allegations as smears for years without preparing a real defense. She finally managed to whisper that on the advice of counsel, she invoked her right to remain silent. Vance nodded slowly, letting the record reflect her refusal to explain the records or rebut the testimony, then closed that folder and reached for another, to discuss something she definitely could not remain silent about, as it involved ongoing crimes rather than past ones. Money. The second folder was considerably thicker, and Vance spread its contents methodically across the table to create a visual display of documents, charts, and photographs, telling a story of systematic financial abuse. He began with the E Street Group, a political consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., founded in 2017 and owned by Tim Minett, her current husband. Omar straightened slightly, feeling more familiar with this territory as she had prepared talking points for campaign finance questions, asserting that Tim ran a legitimate business serving multiple Democratic campaigns. Vance stopped her, holding up a financial summary showing that over 4 years, her campaign and affiliated PACs had paid the E Street Group just over $2.9 million. He contextualized the number with a comparison chart showing that the average spending on political consulting for a House member in a safe district like hers was approximately $200,000 per cycle, whereas she spent over $700,000, which was 350% above the average. When she claimed her campaign had unique requirements due to her national profile, Vance repeated slowly that her campaign had unique requirements, such as paying for her boyfriend's divorce. The chamber stirred as he detailed that in 2019, Tim Minot filed for divorce, citing his affair with her, and his wife's attorneys estimated legal fees at $85,000. Vance held up bank records showing that in the 6-week period surrounding the divorce filing, her campaign made 4 separate payments to the E Street Group, totaling $87,000, all listed as digital consulting services, yet internal records obtained from a former employee showed no digital products were delivered, no websites launched, and no work performed. Omar's attorney wrote furiously, preparing objections about itemization standards. But Vance moved on to travel expenses, pulling out records from February 2020, showing 2 first-class tickets to Dubai, costing $14,600 for international donor outreach. When asked who she met, she claimed confidentiality. But Vance noted the FEC audit found not a single meeting record. He then displayed photos from Tim Minot's Instagram, showing them at the Burj Khalifa, a luxury resort, and a nightclub hardly donor outreach. Vance criticized her for using donations from working-class people to fund a romantic vacation. And when she failed to provide context or evidence of legitimate meetings, he produced a cooperation agreement stamped with FBI letterhead. He revealed that Tim Minot, her current husband, had been cooperating with federal investigators for 4 months, having realized his legal exposure. Omar looked toward the doors, but her husband was in a secure conference room providing testimony. Vance played audio recordings made in her home, office, and car. The first featured Omar instructing Minot to split payments across multiple invoices to avoid scrutiny and laughing that if audited, they would claim Islamophobia to make investigators back off. The chamber was silent as Vance condemned her for instructing her husband on committing fraud and using her religion as a shield. Omar felt a fundamental collapse inside her, realizing Tim had betrayed her. Vance clarified that the recording was obtained through lawful cooperation, not entrapment, adding that Minot had provided emails showing she personally approved inflated invoices and bank records showing payments to shell companies routed back to accounts she controlled. He detailed $400,000 paid to a company at her sister's address and other sums to family members, expressing contempt for her positioning as a champion of the working class while taking their money for personal gain. Omar whispered a request to speak with her attorney, but Vance continued, closing the campaign finance folder to open the third and thickest one, shifting the focus from personal corruption to betrayal of her oath and country. Vance's voice shifted to a harder, more serious tone as he stated that while the previous crimes were serious, the next section concerned foreign influence. Omar felt a deep chill, knowing this was the real danger. Vance began with Qatar, producing a dossier on the government's influence operations, and a timeline showing her relationship with Qatari interests began in early 2018. He revealed she attended a private, undisclosed dinner at the Qatari ambassador's residence, known through intelligence shared by allied governments conducting surveillance. He showed photos of her entering and leaving the residence and financial records of a $500,000 wire transfer to her PAC, 14 days later, routed through shell entities from the Qatari Investment Authority. Omar tried to argue that meeting with allies was normal, but Vance countered that taking hidden money and doing their bidding was a crime, displaying a Qatari strategy document alongside a speech she delivered on the House floor containing identical phrasing. He then produced a photo of her meeting Nasser al-Khelaifi, an intermediary for Qatari state security, in a hotel suite for over 3 hours, a meeting absent from official records. Moving to Turkey, Vance detailed meetings with government officials and a voting record perfectly aligned with Turkish interests, noting she was the only Democrat to vote present on the Armenian Genocide Resolution and voted no on the Kurdish Protection Amendment. He revealed her PAC received $300,000 through shell organizations tracing back to Turkish business interests shortly after she dined with the Turkish ambassador. Finally, he addressed her connection to CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations, citing its founding leadership's ties to Hamas and its designation by the UAE as a terrorist-supporting organization. He showed records of her appearances, donations received, and internal emails from a cooperating source discussing how to leverage her office and coordinate messaging. Vance accused her of functioning as a mouthpiece for foreign governments and organizations connected to groups that killed Americans. Omar's composure cracked, and she passionately decried the accusations as dual loyalty smears used to marginalize minorities, asserting her status as an American citizen and refugee who took an oath to the Constitution. Vance waited until she finished, then quietly responded that the evidence of wire transfers, meetings, and voting patterns was not about religion or ethnicity, but about facts. He opened the final section to examine her loyalty and oath directly, playing a video of Catherine Wilson, a widow of a 9/11 victim. In the video, Wilson described her husband's final call from the North Tower, and her pain at hearing a congresswoman describe the attacks as some people did something. Wilson looked into the camera, stating that those words erased her husband's murder. The chamber was silent, and Vance read the transcript of Omar's 2019 speech, where she used the phrase, challenging her minimization of the attacks. When Omar claimed she was taken out of context and was referring to the aftermath's discrimination, Vance asked why she didn't say that clearly. Instead of reducing the murder of thousands to something, he presented a pattern of her evading condemnation of terrorism. A 2012 post claiming Israel hypnotized the world. Her refusal to say yes when asked if Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization, and her description of Antifa as an idea. He demanded she clearly condemn Al-Qaeda without qualification. When she refused to take orders on her phrasing, he challenged her to use her own words to tell the country how she felt about the organization that killed Michael Wilson. Her silence was telling. Finally, Omar snapped, shouting that America had committed more violence than Al-Qaeda and that American foreign policy killed more Muslim children, calling her accusers hypocrites, controlled by AIPAC lobbyists and Jewish donors. She stopped abruptly, realizing she had revealed her true thoughts. Vance quietly asked if she wanted to finish her thought about Jewish donors, noting she had just shown exactly who she was. He summarized the evidence: immigration fraud, stealing from donors, taking foreign money, minimizing 9/11, refusing to condemn Al-Qaeda, and ranting about Jewish control. He concluded that her loyalty lay elsewhere and moved to vote on a referral to the DOJ. Marcus Webb then stood up, stating he could no longer ethically represent her based on the undisclosed evidence, and withdrew as counsel effective immediately, walking out despite her pleas. Vance offered her a chance to find new counsel or proceed, and she demanded to make a statement. However, Senator Amy Klobuchar spoke first, stating she was profoundly troubled by the evidence and believed an investigation was necessary. Other Democrats followed suit. Even Rashida Tlaib released a statement urging cooperation with investigators, citing withheld information. Abandoned and isolated, Omar claimed it was a conspiracy of the deep state and sellout Democrats. The committee voted 12-6 to refer the case to the DOJ. When Vance announced the referral for immigration fraud, campaign finance violations, FARA violations, and obstruction, Omar broke down, screaming that it was a political assassination and threatening to burn the institution down, claiming she had information on everyone. She shouted that the American flag meant nothing, just a cloth to justify murder. Vance ordered the sergeant-at-arms to escort her out. She was led away screaming as Vance adjourned the hearing, bringing the gavel down with the words, May God have mercy on us all. The footage spread instantly. Within hours, Omar meltdown was trending globally. The speaker stripped her of assignments, and her staff resigned. In Minneapolis, the Somali community's reaction was complex. Many felt betrayed, realizing she had used their story for personal gain. Fatima Hassan, a refugee, expressed that Omar made them look bad and didn't speak for her anymore. At a Somali restaurant, patrons watched in silence, feeling fooled. Vance sat alone in his office, reflecting on how power had corrupted the young refugee who once symbolized hope, acknowledging that the only defense was people willing to do the hard, right thing. 5 days later, Ilhan Omar resigned from Congress, issuing a brief statement without apology. The investigation continued, subpoenas were issued, and the machinery of justice ground forward. A donor in the Bronx tore up a thank you letter. A mosque removed her photo, and the Somali community began rebuilding its reputation. Most Americans saw a woman who had been given everything: refuge, freedom, power, and used it to enrich herself and serve foreign interests, expressing contempt for the country that saved her. The refugee became a defendant who would spend years answering for her actions. Some people did something, was what she had said, and finally, something had been done about it.